Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of 1 Samuel, the 25th chapter. And as we went through in the 24th chapter, right, with Saul pursuing after David, and the Lord giving David a golden opportunity, as you would say, to slay Saul, yet he spares his life, upon which Saul, gets cut, right, by that action, and acknowledges, right, that truly David will be established as king, and asks David to swear unto him to preserve his line and not to cut them off when he became king. So 1 Samuel 25:1, and Samuel died, and all the Israelites were gathered together and lamented him, and buried him in his house at Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon, whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great in the sense of riches. And he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now, obviously, when we get to the third verse, it'll tell you this is Nabal, but it wasn't him physically shearing his sheep, right? His sheep, in other words, his sheep were being sheared in Carmel by his servants, and the shearing is when they shave the hair off of the. Let me just go into the word here, and that's where you would get your wool and so on and so forth from. But it was a process. Well, not Carmel. Shearing. Right, to shear, to mow, to be cut off. So then, they didn't really give too much on it, but sheep shearing. There you go. The annual process of removing a sheep's wool, fleece, using either blade shears, hand clippers, or electric clippers. And then the wool would then be used for, they could use that to make, clothing, apparel, and so on and so forth. All right. So, continuing on, this guy is very rich. Verse 3, and the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. Now, the name Nabal, which is nomen omen, means, I believe it means foolish or fool, right? Nabal, fool. So that should give you a little hint. And the name of his wife Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. But the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. So he was a fool, he was evil, he was selfish, he was he was basically a niggard. Okay, that's what he was. And David heard in the wilderness that Nabal did shear his sheep. And David sent out 10 young men, and David said unto the young men, get you up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. Now keep in mind that David was known at this point, right? Like he was known after slaying Goliath, right? There were songs all throughout the land about him, how he had killed his tens of thousands, how he was leading the army of Saul, so David was known. And so he sent his men to go to Nabal and to basically go and greet him. And thus shall ye say to him that liveth in prosperity, peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. And now I have heard that thou hast shearers. Now thy shepherds which were with us, we hurt them not, neither was there aught missing unto them, all the while they were in Carmel. So basically, those of your shepherds that were there, shearing and watching over the sheep, we basically watched over them and guarded them and protected them, so they were good. Ask thy young men, and they will shew thee, right? So you can even ask them, and they'll tell you, your workers. Wherefore let the young men find favor in thine eyes, for we come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, whatsoever cometh to thine hand, unto thy servants and to thy son David. So here David was basically saying, look, we took care of your men, and all we asking for is just, just give us, just a little something, some of your provisions and so on, so we can take care of ourselves with it. And when David's young men came, they spake to Nabal according to all those words in the name of David, and ceased. And Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? And he wasn't asking out of sincerity to know who David was. He knew who David was, but he said it as though like who the hell is David? Why the hell do I care? And there be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shearers and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? So, in other words, who the hell does this David think he is? You know, basically, like nowadays, you got a lot of these unruly servants that turn on their masters going around left and right. And I'm supposed to basically take my provisions and my water and my food and give on to some freaking runaway bandits. Yeah, nah, that's not happening. That's a modern day or another way of saying that, just to paint the picture. So David's young men turned their way and went again and came and told all those sayings. And David said unto his men, gird ye every man his sword. And they girded on every man his sword. So he was like, oh, really? Okay, cool. So, I guess diplomacy is not going to work. So we're going to go over there and pay him a visit. And David also girded on his sword because not only was it like just grimy, but it was disrespectful, right? It was basically the way that he railed on David's servants for having done that kindness unto his servants was like an insult. And David didn't take too kindly to that. So he armed himself and his men, as it says, and David also girded on his sword and went up after, and there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode by the stuff. So 200 stayed back to watch over the supplies that they had, and 400 went with David. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, so one of the workers, saying, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he railed on them. So, and railed, when you go into that word railed, sort of why I gave that impression when I read Nabal's reply. Because as it says here, he railed on him. He didn't say this in like a calm, nice way. It says here to scream, right? To shriek, to scream. So he was basically, yeah, he's basically just getting at them, right? Wilding out. And the servant is telling Abigail here that this is basically what just happened. But the men were very good unto us, and we were not hurt. Neither missed we anything as long as we were conversant with them when we were in the fields. So basically, he just railed on them for no reason, because when we were taking care of the sheep, they took care of us. They didn't hurt us. We didn't lose anything. That's what it means by missing anything. And as long as, when it says conversant, it doesn't mean like speaking, but it means like the whole entire time we were among them over there, we were protected. They were a wall unto us both by night and day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. So they protected us like a defense the whole entire time we were there. Now, therefore, know and consider what thou wilt do. So think of something fast. For evil is determined against our master and against all his household. For he is such a son of Belial that a man cannot speak to him. So in other words, he's such a fool that he's so, you can't even reason with the guy. That's how bad he is. And now look, he just went and got trouble on us because that's David, right? David ain't no joke. And you're gonna rail on him for doing good to you. So the servant probably is a bit nervous at this point as he's telling Abigail, which is like you could say like the the mistress or the madam of the house, the mistress, you could go with that, or the madam, the lady, whatever. Um, and verse 18, it says, Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 200 and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep ready dressed and 5 measures of parched corn and 100 clusters of raisins, and that's a lot of provisions, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on asses, donkeys. And she said unto her servants, Go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she told not her husband Nabal. So she got the provisions quick, got him, loaded them up on some asses, and then sent them, right? And she was basically on her way behind them, but she didn't tell Nabal what was going on. And it was so, as she rode on the ass, that she came down by the covert of the hill. So basically like by like a shady area, right? The shade being provided by like a mountain or a hill. And behold, David and his men came down against her, and she met them. So as she was going there, David and his men were coming towards her, and then they basically met each other. Now David had said, Surely in vain have I kept all that this fellow hath in the wilderness. So clearly it was for nothing, in watching over this guy's stuff, so that nothing was missed of all that pertained unto him. And he hath requited me evil for good. So this is how he pays us back? Okay, I got something for him. So and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave of all that pertain to him by the morning light, any that pisseth against the wall. So David was pissed off. And by this statement, he was determined to basically go in there and slay all of Nabal's men. That's what it means by any that pisseth against the wall. It's a euphemism for men. Because, back then, it like even if you look at how stalls, when you go to the urinal, how stalls are designed, you sort of like, it's designed in a way where you're technically pissing against the wall, right? And in the ancient world or in certain other countries, it would just be by a tree or an actual wall or some bush somewhere, right? But it signifies males. Verse 23, And when Abigail saw David, she hasted and lighted off the ass, and fell before David on her face, and bowed herself to the ground, and fell at his feet, and said, Upon me, my lord, upon me let this iniquity be. So I'll accept the blame for this. And let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak in thine audience, and hear the words of thine handmaid. So basically, please give me like 2 minutes, just 2 minutes, and let me just speak real quick. Verse 25. Let not my lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. So please don't don't let this bother you, right? Don't let this guy. He's a fool. He's an idiot. That's literally in his name. That's how he is. But I, thine handmaid, saw not the young men of my lord, whom thou didst send. So I wasn't there. I didn't see them when they came, because if I did, then, matters could have gone differently. Now, therefore, my lord, as the Lord Yahweh liveth, and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, and from avenging thyself with thine own hand, now let thine enemies and they that seek evil to my lord be as Nabal. Right? So basically, seeing that the Lord has sent me here to basically hold you back from going to shed blood and avenge yourself, let your enemies, basically it's like a saying, right? Let your enemies be like Nabal, i.e. fools, and whatever is about to happen to Nabal basically would befall your enemies, which would be like a good thing for you, right? Obviously, if bad things befall your enemies, that's a good thing for you. But she's making a point here. Verse 27, And now this blessing which thine handmaid hath brought unto my lord, let it even be given unto the young men that follow my lord, right? So all those provisions, basically you and your men can have. I pray thee, forgive the trespass of thine handmaid, for the Lord Yahweh will certainly make my lord a sure house, So the Lord is certainly going to establish your house, because my Lord fighteth the battles of the Lord, because you fight for the Lord. And evil hath not been found in thee all thy days. So you've basically been pure of heart. You're innocent. Yet a man is risen to pursue thee and to seek thy soul. Because now at this point it was known, right, that Saul was after David, and it was likely painted as an image like David was just like a servant that turned on his master. And that's why Nabal said what he said. But you can tell by Abigail's words that she didn't believe that. And so, as she's saying here, basically, you're innocent. You've been fighting the battle of the Lord, and yet there is a man risen to pursue thee and to seek thy soul, being Saul. But the soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord Yahweh thy God, i.e., David, that is, meaning you're going to be preserved. And the soul of thine enemies shall he sling out, as out of the middle of a sling. So it said that she was basically like, like a wise woman, so she was good with her words, and making that little reference there with the sling, which is interesting because that's how David killed Goliath. But as she's saying, you're going to be good, right? But the souls of your enemies, the Lord is going to sling out. He's going to basically take them out. And it shall come to pass when the Lord Yahweh shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel. So when the Lord establishes this, he establishes you, he makes you ruler over Israel, that this shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord, either that thou hast shed blood causeless, or that my Lord hath avenged himself. See, so just hold back, so that when the Lord does all this good unto you and he establishes you, this won't be like a stain on your record or on your reputation for having murdered a man in his house, to avenge yourself. Because technically, even though, you're angry at it, by law, it wouldn't really be justified, right? Because he hasn't, like, let's just say he hasn't done something to you that's worthy of death. But when the Lord shall have dealt well with my Lord, then remember thine handmaid, right? So when all is done and the Lord establishes you, at least remember me. Verse 32. And David said to Abigail, Blessed be the Lord Yahweh God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me. And blessed be thy advice. And blessed be thou, which hast kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand. For in very deed, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, which hath kept me back from hurting thee, except thou hadst come to meet me, surely there had not been left unto Nabal by the morning light any that pisseth against the wall. So basically, like, in all seriousness, if the Lord didn't send you here, we were going to kill everybody, or all the men over there. It was going to be a bloodbath over there. So David received of her, or of her hand, that which she had brought him, and said unto her, Go up in peace to thine house. See, I have hearkened to thy voice, and have accepted thy person. So don't worry, I've heard you. I'm not gonna go ahead and do it. You're gonna be all right. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he held a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. His dumbass, he's drinking and chilling, not even knowing what just happened. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunken. Wherefore she told him nothing, less or more, until the morning light. So he was so drunk, so nice, you could say, that, she didn't even say anything to him concerning the situation until the next morning. But it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, so when he was finally sober again, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. So at this point, he basically probably went into shock, whether it was a stroke or whatever. But he basically went into shock, and probably went into like a coma, or like a comatose state. Maybe even went brain dead, But as it says, he became as a stone. So he became like a paralyzed, just, like somebody that's in a coma. And it came to pass about 10 days after that the Lord Yahweh smote Nabal, that he died. So he didn't recover. He basically just ended up dying from there. And when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be Yahweh, that hath pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal." So the Lord judged, my situation from the hand of Nabal, that demon who insulted me, and hath kept his servant from evil. For the Lord Yahweh hath returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head. And David sent and communed with Abigail to take her to him to wife. So he basically sent messengers to say, well, because now she wasn't a married woman, right? So he sent to take her hand in marriage. And when the servants of David were come to Abigail to Carmel, they spake unto her, saying, David sent us unto thee to take thee to him to wife. And she arose and bowed herself on her face to the earth, and said, Behold, let thine handmaid be a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. And I'll read this in another translation as well. But it says she bowed in NLT. She bowed low to the ground and responded, I, your servant, would be happy to marry David. I would even be willing to become a slave washing the feet of his servants. So she did not waste any time with that. And Abigail hasted and arose and rode upon an ass with 5 damsels of hers that went after her. And she went after the messengers of David and became his wife. And David took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they were also both of them his wives. Yeah, ain't no prophet come and tell David he was going off for doing that. But because he wasn't. But Saul had given Michal, his daughter, which is David's first wife, David's wife, to Phalti, the son of Laish, which was in Galim, right? Because at this point, remember, Saul was after David, right? So he basically remarried his daughter to somebody else, even though technically she was still David's wife. And that brings us to the end of 1 Samuel, the 25th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Rachak Kudash. Until next time, Shalom.